I'd like to start by just saying one thing. I think it is possible that a place like this, Waquoit, Papaneset, can be restored to their glory, even with all the problems that we face pushing at it every day of the week, like road runoff and lawns, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just saying, I think amazing things can be done. So tonight, I want to show you a few places where we've been working around the world where amazing things are being done. I'm just trying to figure out how to start this thing. Just tap on that. Okay, so now I'm ready to go. Okay. A lot of this work originally began on Cape Cod. And I want to tell you about one of the first projects that took place in the town of Harwich. I just have to figure out how to make it work. Okay, there. Back in the mid-'80s, the way we dealt with cesspool haulers and cesspool waste was to dump them in pits. There's an example. That pit was dug in coarse sand at the landfill. And every year it would be filled up and the waste would go down. They'd fill the thing up and dig another hole, same way. That's just a few feet above the drinking water table of that town. All of the EPA priority pollutants were there. I mean, all of the top 15, I should say, heavy metals and very, very high strength, much stronger than sewage. When I looked at how much it would cost to fix it up with the conventional technologies at the time, it was simply a no-starter. So I decided that I wanted to invent an ecological technology that was powered by the sun and use the genius of nature to solve our problems. I knew that it would be very complicated and that no human beings would have the overall knowledge to understand the basic internal pathways and biological circuits. But you're looking at the first eco machine, clear-sided tanks connected together with piping to form a river like beads on a string. And then the most important thing happened after the introduction of sunlight. As most of you know, sunlight is not a part of most of the wastewater treatment world. I introduced into these tanks life forms, thousands of species, literally thousands of species from over a dozen different wild environments from around here. Wet places, pig wallows in a farm, you name it. I was gathering life from these places and putting them in these tanks. And almost immediately they began to self-organize, self-design, and start to clean up the water. That's just another component, which is an analog of a marsh system. There's a creature that was put into the tanks downstream of the midpoint so that sludge would not accumulate within the system itself. What happened was the tanks created completely new communities that had never been seen before. The great biologist Lynn Margulis and her students at MBL analyzed these sides, the communities in the tanks. They recognized the species, but they'd never seen the communities. New communities were being designed to solve the problem of eliminating the priority pollutants, of reducing the nitrogen, and of sequestering the phosphorus. As a result, the system met standards for drinking water for heavy metals. It was also met advanced wastewater standards. At first, people were incredulous, and they didn't want to believe that. And what we did was the federal US EPA, the secretary had his staff come up and analyze what we were doing at Harwich and said that this was genuine, bona fide innovation, and that I was given a major new award by the US EPA for the work that took place there, which helped me raise the money to verify the technology over several years in a year-round facility that you're looking at here, and you can see here. So what we were able to do was, using mostly sunshine and thousands of species of life forms, was to transform this foul mess into pure water. And it just gave us confidence. And then, as you see, this was a year-round facility. The original facility was only run for 6 months. Oops, sorry. Then a few years later, again, this time with US EPA funding, we built a facility in Burlington, Vermont, actually in South Burlington, Vermont. And the conventional wisdom at that time is marshes and those kinds of things are fine, but they only work in warm weather. And this ecological engineering that these people are talking about isn't going to work in the winter. And so we designed a facility in a greenhouse. There's the greenhouse. There's what it looked like inside. There were over 400 species of flowering plants, trees, shrubs, and beneficial plants of many types. That system performed beautifully. In the 1st of January, including nitrification and denitrification, it was performing as well as in the 1st of August. It was, the seasons were invisible to it inside. And the reason was, in part, every season of the year, we went out into the wild and brought spring into the greenhouse, or summer into the greenhouse, or fall into the greenhouse, and so on. And so this was operated under the oversight of the US EPA for a number of years, and a lot of very interesting things got chronicled. One of the most important things was our ability to reduce nutrients from the water to extremely low levels. And that made it very critical. We're also able to deal with pathogens in the water. Here's a sketch of the facility. It's like the original one in Harwich. It's got the tanks, and they're in parallel. They're 2 complete systems operating in parallel. And it really was quite remarkable. These systems can be designed to function year-round. They're not just summer season only. The other thing is that places, Waquoit Bay is just not the only place where the wastes are not being dealt with. There are some quite serious extreme examples. One of them is in Fuzhou in South China. And this is a city that is one of the, like so many of these cities, it's just grown up almost overnight, instantly. It has 80 kilometers of canals, and its only sewage treatment is the canals. There is no sewage treatment. The, you know what, just roars down pipes. I'll show you what it looks like. Whoops. There's the, it all just comes into these canals. And there you can see the sewage just pouring out of the side of the buildings. That's how it works. And it's stunk. And it also, there are, you know, issues with things like cholera and other issues with that kind of an environment. So there was no space, obviously, to solve this in a greenhouse or a building. So we decided to create floating technologies. They were floating eco machines or floating restorers. And they were designed to do specifically the same things that were happening in South Burlington. And there's an image of the water. This is the early construction of the system. And there it is, up and running. And it performed remarkably well. We had incredibly harsh standards by the Chinese EPA. We had to have the total nitrogen to be below 15. And when you think pipes are coming in everywhere, it's not like there's one end and another and you treat between the two. You're being bombarded from every direction all the time. And there is sort of a cross section of what it looks like. There's a huge amount of surface area underwater. That's part of the thing. Living surface areas hosting very dense communities. And to give you an example, and there is also selective aeration. So there's zones of air and zones of no air close to each other, so we can have nitrification, denitrification going on at high rates in close proximity. There's another image. And what's really interesting here is that, just the one comment that I wanted to make about it, the reduction levels for BOD, close to 98% reduction levels for TKN, total calcium nitrogen, over 90%. This thing is really working, and as a result, fishes were introduced. These are the cyprinid or Chinese carp fishes were introduced, and they thrived in an environment that was almost devoid of air-breathing life beforehand. And this was just less than a kilometer, and our plan was to go on and do 80 kilometers. However, other people had different ideas, and in the end, we had to retreat without being able to do that. Another example is in Berlin, Maryland. Tyson Foods had a wastewater treatment plant that was expensive, used a ton of energy, and they couldn't meet the discharge standards, and they were in full-out battle with the state of Maryland. So we designed and built another floating technology that the sketch shows looks something like that. And the water flows from one end to the other through this serpentine course that you can see in that drawing, so that it meanders back and forth along these floating complexes. There is an example when they're just starting to grow, and then let me see if I can, but grow they do, and very, very quickly. And there you can see them there. It is really, really remarkable the way they respond to this high strength slaughterhouse waste. They're slaughtering over 1 million chickens a week there. And so you can get some idea of the horror of it all. The advantage was that this design reduced the amount of electricity required by 74%. This design eliminated the twice weekly dredging of the sediments out of the bottom of these ponds. We were digesting our own sediments, and we can do that. We even have examples on Cape Cod of in Flax Pond and Harwich, reducing the sediments by 25 inches in 2 years, the depth of the sediments. So it can be done. So then this just gives you some kind of background, the various ways, and there, I think at last count, there may be 120 of these eco machines in various parts of the world. Some of them are used to clean up waste of buildings and villages. The range is just quite remarkable. Okay, now we're getting closer to home. And
does anybody have any questions?
Something is wrong with this PowerPoint, but I think we can use our imaginations. This is a sea-run brook trout, and Santuit Pond. See this up here?
Yeah. You can keep.
It doesn't matter. I think I'll just go to this one. Everybody knows what
Yeah.
I became very interested in Santuit Pond, and then, of course, later on, Matt suggested I should get interested in Waquoit Bay. Santuit Pond, which is, as you can see here, has been very heavily infected by the cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae that can be very toxic. But it can also, these toxic algae can be controlled. We have half a dozen major projects in California that's operated by our son, Jonathan. And he has brought these lakes, some of them very big, back to usable place where they were 20, 25 years ago. It's remarkable what's happening out there. The same thing can happen here. So my idea is that, yeah, go ahead.
Do the plants have to be harvested to get the nutrients out of the system? Or they just...
Well, actually, in this particular system that I'm about to talk to you about, the plants are being used as a nursery for riparian plants to do the river downstream. In other words, we're trying to combine that in that way. But typically, the plants are harvested. So the thought here is that I think Santuit Pond is about 176 acres, something like that. And so basically, we want to put on the pond a floating restorer. I had one to show you right now, but it's in another place in the PowerPoint. And the idea is that this floating device will, in fact, reduce upstream the nutrients, as well as other things that are in the water that you don't want. And we calculate that roughly a 1.7 to 2 acre floating system will remove between 50 and 60,000 pounds of nitrogen a year from the pond. And we think that that will begin to stabilize it. I know there are plans to dredge it and other things. I don't think that's necessary, but that's just my opinion. And then have the water that entering the river be of a much higher quality and not dominated by cyanobacteria. There's a very interesting story behind all of this toxic algae that really began in Woods Hole about the year we arrived in 1970. John Ryther and his colleagues began to study in the oceans where the red tide organisms tended to predominate and where other more beneficial organisms like diatoms were in decline. And he was able to piece together that at the heart of it, pollution favored the cyanobacteria. The problem is that cyanobacteria are lousy food for most other marine organisms. It's like giving junk food. And so that the whole thing got out of whack. And they literally went all over the world to identify the beneficial communities of algal communities and the nuisance communities of algae. And this story began to unfold. And one of the things that they also discovered, and I've done work in this area, is that rock minerals favor the beneficial organisms. And so that if you grind, say, basalt rock and into very fine powder, passing through a 200 mesh screen, you will tend to support the more beneficial communities. And we have a facility in Holland right now that's studying various ways these food webs can be manipulated doing this. And I'm part of that work. So the idea then is to introduce into the stream park this remineralization, the fine rock powders, and try and change the balance of the minerals. Don't forget it's been a long time since the last ice age. And there's been a lot of erosion in between. And this is not a terribly mineral rich area. We're basically on sand. So this is a big factor on Cape Cod, I believe. So the idea then is to get into the stream, to reintroduce rock minerals, particularly those of volcanic origin. And there are some elements that are more important than others, like silica and iron. And also to do what they do in many parts of the world is to introduce more surface area within the stream. And this is very often done with simply cuttings from shrubs and things like that and placed in the water. We've actually looked at how the communities inside special tanks respond to this, and it's very positive. So that's another thing that could be done. The third thing is to begin to replant, reforest, if you will, the sides of the streams. And I know you've been doing this for 25 or 30 years. And what I think is critical about this is I worry that as temperature rises, we may hit a thermal point that the the organisms that we're trying to save, you know, the herring, the eel, and the trout, and so on, may reach a point where it's too warm. And the best thing we can do is to make sure there is as much shade around these ponds and streams as is possible before the water gets down, say, here into the bay. And I don't have a lot of proof of that because I can't find precise thermal data for a single same time of year at a same place over a period of 100 or 150 years. Then we're down to Waquoit Bay. And I just want to say that it's, I should put some prices in. That restore in Santuit Pond will be about $3 million. And that includes its own power station and what have you. So when it comes to Waquoit Bay, the strategy is to basically create a floating restore complex, because they won't all be in one place. You know, they'd be in the various bays, which would be overall 8 acres in size. And the way we've designed it, it should reduce overall between 1/4 and 500,000 pounds a year of nitrogen from the system. And the cost for that one, and you'll see a little bit what it might look like in just a moment, would run about $13 million. We are looking at ways to bring the physical structure costs down, but these are the numbers that we currently work with, because these are the numbers that we are building to. I said I had a slide that should have been back there, but now it's here. This is a floating restore along the Blackstone River in Grafton, and its purpose was not to remove nutrients, but to remove crude number 6 crude oil, and it's doing an amazing job, well over 90% removal using this technology. We're currently trying to raise the money to refund it and ramp it up to do much more area than just this half mile that you see here. But this is sort of what it might look like in the pond. Now I'm going to sort of end with the challenge of Waquoit Bay. I think it takes an organization like yours to move things forward. I really feel that there's kind of that multiplicity of advocacy and different perspectives is what kind of open the floodgates, if you will, to true innovation. And the fact that there is a group of people, the Citizens for the Protection, who are advocating on behalf of this incredible body of water is going to make a huge difference. This is a view. You don't have to look at this photograph. You can just turn around. But and you can see that that here we're looking at maybe this is a slightly bigger systems, but not a lot compared to Waquoit Bay. The difference in acreage is not very great. They're about the same. I think something around 800 acres. What is it, 845 here? It doesn't matter. The point is It's we can get back to the money side of things in just a moment.
I figured, I think using this, the area, we take about 17 acres of the resource. Or what we think.
17
Yeah.
acres. I don't think that's a. I
I
don't,
thought that was just that.
yeah, you're probably right. Anyway, here's an example that we've gone all the way from Cape Cod to Belize. And this is a place called Blackador Key. And it's an uninhabited island in one of the most beautiful coral reef areas in the Western Caribbean. The island is owned by Leonardo DiCaprio, and he had a problem. Actually, he has two problems, but he may have other problems too. This is San Pedro, a town also on an island less than 10 miles away. There is no dealing with the waste in that town. That he discovered after he bought it that he's sitting on a ticking time bomb, and so he didn't know what to do. I was approached, and I said, well, the best way to do it would be to surround the Blackador Cay with a series of floating restorers, and one on each side, because on the one side there is the town, and on the other side, a little further away, is kind of fairly high-tech agriculture, and subject to a fair amount of distant pollution. So this is a 2.2 mile long structure, and it's designed like these things you've seen to take up nutrients, to detoxify the toxins in the water, and so on. And this is just another drawing of it, so that you can see that these systems can be used for other purposes, for mooring boats, for aquaculture, for all kinds of recreational purposes. And in fact, right now we're working on a restorer for the eastern end of the Mediterranean in a lagoon called Lake Bardaville. And the idea is to literally design the water quality improvement system for the whole area as a working platform for about 3,000 people in that part of the Sinai Desert, right on the Mediterranean side of the Sinai. And so a lot of diversity can be built into them. It could be educational. Of course, it can be commercial when it comes to various kinds of food production. And it can also be possible for recreation, moorings. A lot can be done at relatively little cost. So what I'm suggesting here is that Waquoit, which we're probably looking at about $20 million, which is lots but not, might be a really remarkable thing and could change.
Over how many years?
Pardon?
Over how many years?
Well, I was told I was amateurizing way too fast. It should be over 30 years, as any wastewater treatment plant would be. I think it should be treated in the same financially quote unquote friendly manner.
Just to interrupt you a second.
Yeah.
When I think we ran some numbers on the cost compared to conventional sewage treatment. And it was quite a few magnitudes or magnitudes
Yeah.
lower.
It is less than $10 a pound to do it this way, whereas I think some of the numbers for the sewer and treat are up 150.
Just the sewer plant itself, estimated, just putting a sewer plant in, never mind all the stuff that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Seems to come in at $30 or $40,
Yeah.
something like that. Then you have all the other things.
And then you have all the other things, which more than doubles it. Yeah.
I don't, those are the figures out of my head.
Yeah.
Big calculation.
Yeah. Well,
I think you said so.
I think Matt said something very telling in his introduction, where he said, maybe this particular area is so far behind, it's ahead. You don't have to fix. I mean, you do. We've got to improve the septic tanks and all of that. But the opportunities here are quite remarkable. And because they're friendly with the marine community, just one last thing, nothing to do precisely with the talk, although there are bits and pieces in it. My book entitled Healing Earth. And I think that's it.